Well, welcome to this edition of Beyond Belief. We've got a great program in store for you today. Mark Combs with us. He's an investigative researcher dealing with ancient mysteries and the mysteries we will talk about on this program. One of his books, And the Beginning.
He says he has discovered what life was like before Noah's great flood. Author Mark Combs is fascinated with the history of man and biblical mysteries. His book, In the Beginning, cross-references ancient texts with modern science to uncover the true events leading to the flood and the reason for mankind's destruction. Mark explains how accepting a completely different past is necessary to understanding our future. Today on Beyond Belief.
Mark, I've got to ask you, with that great introduction about who you are, how did you get involved in this?
This is something that's a part of my background and study of things that just caught my attention and interested me. And a lot of the things that are in this book reflect my personal journey with regard to questions about this story that I felt like deserved answers. And so I wanted to dig and ferret out the information. So a lot of the things that are in this book are not my personal opinion as much as they are documented research and where the research takes the story.
Now, you said something interesting too. You said this story. And I've always wondered if what we read in the Bible about Noah, for example, and that flood and everything leading up to it and afterwards, was merely just a story.
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that the first few chapters of the book of Genesis, as it is presented for us, covers a period of about 2,000 years of human history. And the average reader could sit down and read those 10 chapters in 35 to 40 minutes. So there's not a lot of detail there. Most of it is overview, but we do get some highlights. The story of the flood gives us perhaps the most detailed, but even in that, it's still a highlight. There's a lot of other aspects of this story that you find in other literature outside the biblical text.
We have to assume that something dramatic happened during that time period. Is that a pretty accurate guess?
I think if we could physically compare the world before the flood to the world we have today, we would see a drastic difference. If you're talking about a global flood, you're talking about an extinction level event that changed things on a catastrophic level. So obviously there's going to be a pre-flood, post-flood drastic change.
Has science caught up with the actual date of this tragedy, this catastrophe?
In some areas, I think they have, keeping in mind that science sees flood regions around the world. They don't connect them as all being a part of the same. And in many areas, we date things according to the geology of that specific area. One of the most compelling stories, and I have a couple of books on this, and many of your viewers may have seen documentaries on the flood involving the Black Sea. It's a really compelling story, and I believe it gives us something to really grasp what a catastrophic flood would do to a region. So in some senses, I think science has.
What are the possibilities of what might have caused this flood?
I think the possibilities really have to be something of an external force that affected the earth in a catastrophic manner. And we tried to track that within the book. What I ended up with wasn't what I had in my mind when I started my research, but it was where the research led. And so as I track through the book, I'm getting into an area where I didn't really want to go initially, but it's where the research is pushing me, and it's where we take the reader.
Are we talking about rain, an asteroid? What happened?
Well, you've got, as it's presented in the Bible, a mixture of a couple of things. You've got a period of rain that lasts for 40 days and 40 nights nonstop.
That's a lot of rain.
That's a lot of rain, and it causes some problems scientifically that you have to resolve. And we kind of approach those in the book because that much rain changes the heat in the atmosphere. Not only would it flood everything, it would basically cook everything within the Earth's atmosphere.
Sure.
So you have to resolve that, or no one's going to survive this event, even if they are in a boat that floats with all their collection of animals. The other aspect is the Bible tells us that we have waters that come from under the earth. Well, if there's waters that are coming from the fountains under the earth, how do you get those to the surface? So you've got a mixture of those two things going on that you have to meld into one compelling event that fits together. And I think we've put those puzzle pieces together in a way that the reader can follow.
And are we talking about a worldwide flood?
A lot of people want to speculate that it's a global flood, but George, I really struggled with that. The Black Sea event is a global flood, is a local flood in that particular area. It's isolated. But the Bible presents floodwaters that precede and exceed more than 15 cubics above the highest mountain. Well, when you start exceeding above the highest mountain, where do the waters stop after that? Well, you get to the next mountain, to the next mountain, to the next mountain. Unless you put the entire globe inside of a container, you can't flood it without it being a global flood. So that's kind of where I was backed into that corner. This is a global flood event, and it really can't be seen any other way.
Mark, prior to the flood, what's the planet look like?
I think prior to the flood, we've got an interesting planet from the aspect of its inhabitants and also from the aspect of its geological composition. As far as the inhabitants are concerned, there's a lot of people who would speculate that in ancient times, there's a very sparse population living in a very unorganized manner. But I think we can see through really looking at details that this covers a period of time from the beginning up to the flood itself of over 1,600 years. And the first command that's given to Adam and to Eve, if we want to start with them,
going way back.
The first command is be fruitful and multiply. So, where can our population go over a period of 1,600 years? I think you've got a thriving population. Our country just celebrated, I think its 240th anniversary as a country. Our population in the United States is over 320 million. So to think that the population of the ancient world over a period of 1,650 years didn't grow exponentially to a large, thriving population is nothing short of nonsense. The other thing, and this is where I really dug in on the scientific end with the work of several geologists, the other thing is the aspect of the composition of the ancient world. I think it was a different planet. And we researched the works of Alfred Wegener, who's probably most famous for his proposal of the theory of Pangea, and continental drift grew out of that. There's also...
and you can see that happen. I mean, when you move those continents back in, it fits like a glove.
It fits very well, but there were two other geologists that liked his idea so much that they began to research deeper. One was out of Australia. His name is Samuel Warren Carey. The other one's out of Germany. His name is Ott Christoph Helgenberg. And unfortunately, his work was never translated in any other language other than German, so I've just been able to read commentaries of his work. But both he and Carey worked independent of each other. They didn't know about each other's work. They both came to the same conclusion that if you take the oceans out of the way, that the entire planet would shrink and everything would fit together on a much smaller planet. One of the things that science has done on the heels of this is they have mapped the geologic formations of the seabed floor, the ocean floor, and this is something you can Google, just ocean floor ages or the crust of the ocean, the ages, and you'll get maps that will tell you that the crust close to the continental shelves is very much older than the crust that is closer to our trenches. And you have to look at that and go, okay, how can we see a progression from a very recent crust here near the trenches, near the deepest parts, to a crust that has been around for a lot longer? If you slowly just kind of remove that crust little by little, the entire planet shrinks. And this is
almost by half, I would
almost
guess.
by half, almost by 50%. And this is what these two geologists were tracking on. It's more popularly known as the expanding Earth theory. Some people call it the growing earth theory, but Samuel Warren Carey even weighed in as to how it would affect everything else on the earth, including the earth's atmosphere and climate, which we know was at one time much richer in oxygen content. It would affect the flora and the fauna. We know that we have animals in ancient times where we have fossils where not only mammals but also insects are many times larger than what we have in the world today. And he said it would also affect the dinosaurs as far as their ability to grow to such enormous sizes. If you had a smaller Earth, things could grow larger. The larger the Earth comes, things change, and everything's affected by that.
When did the flood occur?
The flood, according to the scriptures and the other texts that I'm able to dig up, occurred approximately 1,650 years after the creation event in the Garden of Eden. Now, if you try to track that along the lines of, okay, when was that BC? What date can we go to?
Yeah.
We're probably going back into a range of around 2,300 to, I'm going to say, 2,900 BC.
So we're talking about 5,000 years.
About 5,000 years. And the reason the BC years are difficult to date is because of the structure of everything was dated by rulers. Who this ruler was ruling in this time period, another was ruling in another time period. So it's not a clear-cut calendar. And there's a lot of scholars who deal specifically with that, and they can't come to a unified conclusion.
Mark, I've got a difficult time comprehending that all these animals would get onto an ark.
That is one of the cornerstone questions that those who are critical of this story bring up. It's not only the question of the animals getting on the ark, it's also the question of how do you preserve all of the species of animals that we have in the world today in a space that size.
The ark can't be that big for that.
Well, and I have to agree with that. Now, the structure that we just saw is an enormous structure, and I think the ark was enormous. I do like the fact that this was built in the shape of a box as opposed to the shape of a boat. You have to remember the ark wasn't designed to go anywhere. It was just designed to float. I do believe that there were ballast stones, and they did highlight that in the story. That was one of the things that I researched that I think played an important part of making the ark seaworthy and steady. But as far as the animals, most folks or most researchers would tell you we have in excess of 1.5 million different species of animals in our world today. And even if they were kind to us, to someone trying to sort out this issue, and we came to them and we said, but Noah didn't have to preserve all the sea life, the mollusks, the insects, this, and they were kind, and they said, you know what, let's reduce that all the way down to 500,000 different species of animals. How do you get those on the ark?
Yeah,
you sit down and do
sense.
the math, George. That's over 71,000. If you were going to load it in a week's time, it's over 71,000 pairs of animals in a 24-hour period. It's over 3,000 pairs of animals per hour. It's over 50 pairs of animals per minute. It's over one pair going into the ark per second, every second of every minute of every hour of every day for 7 straight days. And it just collapses the story.
Who's going to pay feed them for 40 days?
Well, you do have the zookeepers that have to keep them going, right? But this is what collapses the story for a lot of skeptics. And part of the thing there is that they are looking for reasons to be critical of the story, not exactly to resolve issues that present challenges for the story. And that's one of the things that I really wanted to do with, and I wanted to be fair with those questions. So we had to sit down and look at the animal kingdom in detail. And just to give a short example, the World Canine Association recognizes in excess of 340 breeds of animals today. The American Kennel Club, I think, only recognizes about 170. But we've got all kinds of different breeds of dogs. We've even got designer dogs like Labradoodles and Cockapoos. Right. My neighbor has a dog, George, it's part Labrador Retriever and part Beagle. I don't know if it's a Bigador or a label. I'm not sure what it is, but it's weird. It looks like a Labrador down to the body, and then no, it's full size.
Is it?
And it has legs that are about 8 inches long. It's a strange looking animal, but these are designer animals. But they will tell us that every single breed of dog in the world today can be tracked back to a gray wolf approximately 15,000 years ago. Well, that leads to a simple question. Does Noah need to save every dachshund, every German Shepherd, and every Labrador Retriever, or does he need to get two
Just
gray
one.
wolves?
Yeah.
These are the types of questions that the skeptics will not ask because they want to be critical of the story. I want to try to find responsible science that can maybe provide some resolution for questions that I think are legitimate questions.
Have you found that science?
I think in a lot of cases we have. We looked at that. I spent an entire chapter on that and tried to make it an entertaining chapter as we went through, but spent an entire chapter on that type of thing because the one thing that we know is that species do change, especially as they get isolated into different regions and different climates. They undergo a change over a period of time. The question is, how long does it take to enact that change? Well, how long did it take us to get from a handful of dog breeds to in excess of 340? Less than 200 years.
Mark, describe for me the size of the ark that Noah built.
This was something that astounded me. It was kind of a starting point in the book. It's probably my least favorite chapter, but I felt like the ark is a central character as far as this story goes. How big is this structure? And what we wanted to try to break down was something so that the reader could put themselves inside the footprint of the ark regardless of where they were. I'm a very visual person. I can imagine, how big a gallon of milk is or how big a barbecue pit is. Something like this, I really didn't have any type of a reference point. So the first thing I did, I realized that most parking lots are lined, and the measurements on those are exact measurements. So I can kind of trust those as far as walking it off. And I wanted to walk off the size of the ark, which I believe was approximately 500 foot in length and about 85 foot in width.
You did that in a parking lot?
The first parking lot I went to was too small. I had to go find another parking lot.
It was huge.
And we found another parking lot that it was out in front of a theater, and it was almost long enough and certainly wide enough. And then I wanted to kind of get something as far as the height of the ark. How tall was this?
Yeah.
The structure that we're given according to the scriptures is in excess of 50 feet. So I stood in front of the theater where it has the big structures coming up, shooting up into the air. I had my wife take a picture of me, and when I got home, I'm 6 foot tall, almost an even 6 foot. I took and I photoshopped myself and just stacked myself on top. And
Took about 8 or 9 of you, huh?
It would have, but at 6 I ran out of building.
Yeah.
This building that I thought was incredibly tall was about 15 feet short of what the actual height of the ark would have been. So this was an enormous structure.
Well, how long do you think it took them to build?
I think they were given, in one area I find they were given a period of about 5 years. I've also found some things that suggest they were given over 100 years. But to me, if you take a span of 100 years to build something, you've also got, what I built 98 years ago, is it starting to deteriorate. Now I'm having to repair that versus, I think it was probably built in a span of about 4 or 5 years.
How do we know the ark even is real? And where is it?
Oh, well, I think it was at one point on Ararat. There's been some geological disturbances in the area there that have really changed the landscape of the mountain. But I think it was real. I think it still is real. It's a more difficult find today for a number of reasons, but there's a lot of historical stories of people who have encountered it, seen it, and documented it over the last 200 or so years, which is modern time frame.
Right.
And a lot of these stories are documented in a book called Noah's Ark Fact or Fable that was authored by Violet Cummings. The book's out of print now, but it really does present some of these things that you won't find anywhere else. So it's a really nice little volume to have. About 140 years ago, there was a tremendous earthquake in the area. The mountain is in Armenia. There was a tremendous earthquake in the area which destroyed a portion of that mountain in an area known as Ahura Gorge. That's the area where the ark was in generally.
According to the Bible.
Well, the Bible does say it was in the mountains
of Ararat.
And the ancient writers in that first century to 200 BC range, in that 300-year range, they all refer to this boat, those who write about it, as being in an area of mountains that's in Armenia, which is the same area that the Bible specifies.
Under ice?
It was under ice in our more modern day times. That mountain range, in the climate that it's in, under ice portions of the year, exposed during portions of the year. The earthquake that happened a number of years ago really destroyed a large portion of the mountain, including a small monastery that was there that did have some display, kind of like a mini museum of the Ark. And we're talking 150 years ago, but yeah, there's a lot of documentation on that.
I've seen pictures, historical pictures, of areas that could look like there was an Ark there,
Right.
petrified. Astronauts have been obsessed with finding the Ark.
James Irwin.
Yep.
Almost lost his life on the mountain searching
Yeah,
for it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And wasn't there some kind of space shuttle picture of
There's
that
been a
region?
number of different radar pictures by flyovers, and then I think some from satellite imagery and things of that nature. I have some friends who were on the mountain in 2013, archaeologists.
Is it safe there still?
It's really a political
Because of-
hot zone. They
yeah.
won't even let expeditions in as of right now. They haven't let expeditions in since
It's with the
2015.
Kurds and
Yeah,
people like that,
PKK.
right? Yeah.
It's you go over there, you're basically putting your life in your own hands, and
That's
it's not
not
safe. But they were on the mountain in 2013, and got a lot of information from them as I was working on things. They really helped me understand the mountain and the area. Very detailed in their work.
Well, what's so important to this, and I have always thought about this since I was a little boy, fascinated with this subject, was that if the Ark is ever discovered, that to me then is proof that the rest of the Bible could be very real and accurate. And that's what's so amazing to me.
Well, that's one of the things that drew me to this story, because it's such a polarizing story. You've got people that accept it on blind faith. You've got other people that are critical to the point of just wanting to take pot shots at it. And let's be honest, it's easy to do that. But if this story is true, like you said, it's a history-changing story.
It's huge.
It changes everything. So to say this is a game changer, I think it was a game changer in many ways. But now we're at the point where in our modern day, we kind of want to dismiss it, scoff at it, or say, yeah, it's just one of those old fables they used to tell. I think there's a lot of things that point to it as being an actual event and a true story.
Now, what's amazing about all of this is let's take God out of the picture for a moment.
Okay.
How did Noah know about building an ark that took how long to build?
I think it was built in a 4 to 5 year period.
Okay, 4 to 5 years to foretell a story of some calamity that was going to occur on the planet, whether it was an asteroid, a flood, or whatever happened. How did he know this?
That's a really good question. You saw in the movie that we had the clip from earlier, the movie Noah, that Russell Crowe plays the character of Noah, and God spoke to him in dreams. And we see several places in the Bible where God speaks to people in dreams. He spoke to Joseph, who was in Egypt, via dreams. He spoke to Daniel, who was in Babylon. He even spoke to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, through his dreams. But we also see in places where he spoke to people directly, not only some of the prophets, such as the prophet Samuel, the prophet Jeremiah, the prophet Isaiah, and others, but also prior to the flood, Adam, it says he walked in the garden with Adam. Enoch, it says Enoch walked with God and God spoke with him. The book of Enoch says that from the time Noah was born, he conversed with the Lord of spirits. And so I think he spoke with Noah directly, and I think from the time Noah was born, he was being prepared for this specific task.
What if, now this is far-fetched.
Okay, I love far-fetched.
What if a group of extraterrestrials came down to the planet, pinpointed someone like Noah, gave him a 5-year head start, and said, an asteroid is coming this way, it's going to hit the water, it's going to create the biggest flood this planet has ever seen. You need to get prepared for that. Is that possible?
I think it's possible, but I think it has a couple of areas where it's really lacking as far as underlying purpose. The Bible and ancient literature presents this extinction level event as a judgment. Even
A cleansing.
even in the works of Zechariah Sitchin, it's presented as a judgment of the gods. Now, he uses the alien influence of the Anunnaki. As you study a lot of these ancient texts, and there are scholars that study the cuneiform tablets, the Sumerian story, the Babylonian story, the Akkadian and Assyrian story, they study them in detail and they try to put them together. One of the most enriching productions on this was by a gentleman named Amar Anus, and he wrote the story of the origin of the Watchers. It's about a 45-page scholarly document, so it's really heady stuff, but he takes in all these different cultures and all of their different influences and dovetails them all together into a story that actually makes sense in the way that it presents things. I do think we have an alien influence, but I don't think it's extraterrestrial. I would say it's interdimensional. I believe the Watchers were spiritual beings. I think they were interdimensional beings.
Which is still an amazing story.
It is an amazing story, and it's something that we in our modern day world just can't comprehend, and not necessarily do we really want to. We like dealing flesh and blood, and we've got enough problems that we've created on our own, don't we?
How did this story come about? I mean, did somebody concoct it? Was there a good storyteller in that day, or did this really happen?
I think it's a valid question. What we find is that there are aspects of this story embedded in flood legends from every culture around the world, hundreds of flood legends. Now, these stories date back, yes, to the ancient times of Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, and other cultures. So these aren't modern day stories, they're ancient stories, and they're embedded in every single culture around the world, and they do carry a lot of common themes in them. Some of the common themes being that the earth was completely destroyed, that it was preserved through the work of one man and his family, that the life of the animal kingdom was preserved along with it, but also that it was a judgment from a supreme being. All of those are factored in. There's another thing that's in a lot of these legendary stories. Almost half of them, just shy of 40%, include an enormous object in the sky. You won't see that in the scriptures. You won't see that in a lot of other literature, but you will see that in the flood legends. You do see it in the...
Sounds like an asteroid.
You do see it in the book of Jasher. It sounds like an asteroid or possibly even something larger. As I began to research it, I think it's absolutely something larger. And I think the documented evidence points to it over and over and over.
See, I don't think God was really as evil as Genesis projected him to be. A God who would come and want to cleanse the planet and eradicate it from all these people that he wanted to get rid of doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Instead, I think some of these ancients had these events occur. They're real. Again, I get back to the asteroid hit the planet and it was a planet killer, and had to come up with a story that made sense to them. And that was, the gods did this to us because we were bad and we were evil. But I don't think there's a God that would wipe out all these people, because they couldn't have all been bad.
Well, that's an interesting question as it comes up, not only the people, but also the rest of creation. What did the giraffe do? Did he eat from the wrong tree as well? I mean, we've got everything, an extinction level event going on here, and a lot of people do present this story as if it has everything to do with the evilness of mankind. I'm sorry, but just because Bob and Curly Sue got a little out of hand, I don't think that's a reason to wipe out the planet. I think there's something much deeper going on here, and that's one of the questions that I wanted to try and track through the entire storyline, because it's the underlying question. Is God just angry and evil and decides to throw a temper tantrum and destroy the planet? Or is God justified in what he does? Is the destruction of the planet the only way to preserve life going forward? And I think a lot of the documentation would point us toward that second alternative.
Or maybe God had nothing to do with it. Maybe it was a calamity, a catastrophe, an earth changer that was going to occur regardless.
I think it was something that was going to occur. I do think it was definitely earth changing. We see that portrayed in all of the cultures. My own perspective from the studies that I've done, from the materials that I've pulled, I can't pull God out of the story. I just can't. I think part of it that keeps him attached to the story is that this is his original creation that he's responsible for. He's the agent that put it all in place in the first place. And in these actions, he's also the agent that is preserving it for a time that's yet future. And we say preserving it, we are setting it aside for something that's yet to come.
As you look at this entire scenario, this very strange scenario, what have you concluded just with your own work?
I think that the time that we see points to a very specific event that happened for a very specific reason. And in the first century, you have Christ, who people regard in different ways. Is he a great teacher? Was he deity? Was he this? Was he that? Well, we have the preserved words of Christ. And one of the things that he did say, regardless of what a person may think of who he actually is, one of the things that we have on record is he said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in a day yet future. So from my perspective, those two things are tied together, and I can't undo that knot, because we're told that an event that happened in the past foretells, foreshadows, points to, and kind of outlines an event that is coming in the future.
So you think it might repeat itself?
I think it's definitely going to repeat itself, not in the way of a flood, but in something else that's also very devastating. When Christ made that statement, he said men's hearts would fail them for fear for the things coming upon the earth, that the powers in the heavens would be shaken, that the stars would fall from the sky. I take that to be meteors, rather. I mean, we know the stars are something else, but you know, we even today refer to them as shooting stars when we see the little meteor trail. But he said the moon and the sun would not give their light. The Old Testament prophets, Amos writes in Amos chapter 8 that I will cause the sun to go down at noonday. Zechariah says it won't be light or dark. It'll be that in-between twilight that we experience at the poles. If you've ever been to Alaska or some of these places where they don't quite ever get dark and they don't quite ever get, fully lit, they're talking about the city of Jerusalem. That's what they're writing about. And they're saying there's coming a time when it's going to be like that. The sun will go down at noonday, and it's going to be twilight, not bright light. That's what the prophets are pointing to. I think that's what Christ is alluding to as well.
If Genesis did not talk about Noah, would we even know about this?
I think we would have stories from other cultures. The Babylonians have their story, the Greeks theirs. So there's a lot of things. Those Sumerians, there's a lot of things that are preserved for us. So I think we'd have a concept of the story. I think the Hebrews, when they put this together, and I do feel like this portion was put together after the Babylonian captivity, which would have put it somewhere around the time period of 500 to 550 BC. And I think that they were putting it together to kind of take some of the prevailing thoughts and correct them, because the prevailing thoughts did not have the Creator involved. And from their perspective, this story can't be told without the one who created it also being the one who destroyed it. And so that's what you get from the Hebrew perspective.
We've got a few emails in for you. Gina from Tallahassee, Florida. Were there really two of every animal on the ark? That's a good question.
It is a good question, and I think it's something that in our own mindset, we've kind of missed what the Bible tells us about this. I not only looked at it in the text that most people would read, I also looked at it in a text called the Septuagint, which is a Greek version of the Old Testament, which would have been what Jesus and the disciples would have been reading in their day. The text that comes to us from Genesis 7, verse 2, and it tells us that of the clean animals, he took male and the female, 7 pairs. We read that, and because 7 is an odd number, we immediately think 14. Well, it says the same thing about the unclean animals. It says of the unclean animals, take the male and his female, 2 pairs.
What's an unclean animal?
That comes to us, I think, from the book of Leviticus. We kind of get a definition of that there. Obviously, it's a definition that's given there, but that predates the writing of Leviticus by a number of years.
But what is it?
Clean animals were animals that could be taken as food and animals that could be used as sacrifice. Unclean animals were animals that were fit for neither.
Like snakes and things like that?
Things of that nature. Also, as you go through the list in Leviticus, you've got things such as anything that has paws as opposed to hooves. Now, as you look at it, and a lot of people go, well, these are strange dietary restrictions. As you look at it, some of these animals that are considered unclean are animals that would eat dead flesh, okay, or animals that would return to their own waste and reconsume that. And so those were considered unclean animals. It was behavior that the Hebrew people were not to observe within themselves. They weren't to touch dead bodies or to have anything to do with waste. They would dispose of it properly. Well, if an animal does that by nature, they are by nature unclean. So I think that's one of the ways that we can separate what's a clean animal, what's an unclean animal. Clearly, if Noah is told, take the clean in this number, take the unclean in this number, he has to know the difference.
See, my thoughts are, Mark, is that somehow Noah had some foretelling knowledge of some event, some catastrophe. So he built this ark, and the animals he put on it were maybe his farm animals, you know, whatever he might have had, pigs, cows, who knows, loaded them on the ark too with them, and they waited for this catastrophe to occur.
Well, Noah would have only dealt with the clean animals as farm animals. So when the Bible tells us to also get the unclean animals, these are the animals that he wouldn't have dealt with, that he really wouldn't have had anything to do with. So whereas I think the aspect does have some premise that he's dealing with domesticated animals, the clean, he's also dealing with those that would have been considered, you mentioned snakes or any type of a reptile, but would have been considered things that you don't domesticate.
Now, the Bible, is that really the only way that we would have known about Noah? I mean, you alluded to some other texts, but I think it's just the Bible.
No, there's other texts that support the story that actually give us more details in other areas. I introduced three main texts in the book. I introduced the book of Enoch, which most people are familiar with. This is the book of First Enoch. There's also a second and third, but we stayed within the book of First Enoch. There's also a book that is called the Book of Jubilees. This dates back to that time period between the last of the prophets and the first century arrival of Christ and the disciples.
Are these written by the same people?
They're written by, in this period of time, you had a lot of people who wrote things anonymously. Now, they're written by scholars, they're written by scribes, they're written by people who are studying, but they never attached their name to it. And in many cases, they didn't attach their name to it out of respect. And so these collection of books are known as pseudepigrapha because we don't know who actually composed them. But they do date to this time period which most scholars refer to as Second Temple literature. The same thing falls with the Book of Jasher, and some scholars will accept that as what we have today is an accurate copy of the Book of Jasher. Some others criticize it, but the Book of Jasher was the third book that we brought in. We try to give a little bit of background on each as to why we were referencing it, and then also bring out the information that's within that book that kind of supports and correlates and helps us to see what the Bible's trying to tell us.
So there are many sources that would corroborate the fact that the Ark story is authentic.
There are many sources, including just historians such as Josephus, who wrote during the first century, Philo, who wrote a few hundred years before that. Even some of your Greeks, such as Plato, refer to things along these same lines. And we separate cultures and don't realize that a writer such as Philo, who was a Jewish writer, actually referenced Plato, who was a Greek.
Well, maybe one day we'll find out, and perhaps the best way is if we ever find the Ark, wherever it may be. I'm George Noory. Thanks for watching Beyond Belief.